Welcome everyone to another broadcast of the Judge Hubert Radio Hour on the Artist First Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at artistfirst.com. And now your host, judge and author, the Honorable Judge Hubert.
Thank you, Scott. It is indeed a pleasure to be with this listening audience once again. Here we are in the month of April. Wow, the year is moving along very fast. We have survived April Fool's Day. Never could figure out why I call it that. And I didn't take the time to look it up either because that was not important. But I can tell you and hope that you all will join with me tonight in a very special, not only a commemoration, but an opportunity to be able to learn some things. You know, we here on the Judge Hubert Radio Hour take the position of a dear friend of mine who's no longer with us. He's made his transition, but I'm always quoting him throughout the course of my day, and that is Dr. Matt King Carter, who says, never go to bed as ignorant as you were when you got up this morning. Every day you ought to learn something new. And so that's our goal here on the Judge Hubert Radio Hour, is to be able to share information that will make your lives better, that will help you to be exposed to something that maybe you didn't know about prior to the time of getting on the call. And so for those of you, call a friend up. You can go on the website, of course, at artistfirst.com and drop down to the Judge Hubert Radio Hour with instructions there. It will tell you how you can listen to us. And even if you don't get a chance to listen to us live, you'll be able to listen to us afterwards because all of our podcasts are indeed recorded. And that goes back a couple years now. So if you've missed any of our previous guests, you get a chance to be able to listen and learn. And so as part of what we try to do here, we try to focus upon three areas: law, education, and social justice. And so tonight is just in keeping with that tradition. We've got a great guest with us. I know as this call unfolds that you're going to be excited and you're going to be encouraged as well as educated tonight on some things that are very important, not only individually, but collectively as well. And so as the host of this Judge Hubert Radio Hour, I am so glad to welcome to our podcast, to our radio show tonight, none other than Miss Tanyika Mayhew Butler. Now, Miss Butler has a very unique background and one that will definitely highlight. And for those of you that have had a chance to go on the website, Scott has already posted her information up there, so you get a little bit of background, but that's only a small part of what Miss Butler does. So welcome to the show. And Miss Butler, I didn't ask you this earlier, but can I call you Tanyika?
Yes, it is definitely okay. Please feel free to call me Tanyika. It's not a problem.
Good. Very good.
Yes.
Very good. Well, Miss Butler, this is a special month. The month of April we're commemorating something very special in our communities and around this country, and it's none other than dealing with the issue that has emerged in recent years and is affecting a lot of people in this country, and that's none other than autism. So as we journey into that discussion tonight, tell us about your background. Where are you from, and how did you get involved in this particular area?
Okay. So, once again, my name is Tanyika Mayhew Butler. I was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. And, of course, we like to refer to it as Duval.
Duval.
So, yes, all day long. And I graduated from Ribault High School, and I actually was Miss Ribault during my years in high school. And so I moved on from there and went off to Florida A&M University. And
that school up on the hill.
Yes, definitely. Earned a bachelor's degree in biology. I know a lot of people wonder how in the world, what made me go that direction, but I did. And I then went from there and earned a degree from Clark Atlanta. So I spent 27 years in the school system teaching, and over those years, I married my college sweetheart. We, celebrated 25 years together. We had 2 kids. I have a son who is currently finishing up this semester, from FAMU, and
right.
We have a daughter. I know. We have a daughter as well, and my daughter's name is Kendall. And so when you ask the question, how did we become a part of the autism community, my daughter Kendall was diagnosed with autism when she was 18 months. Currently, right now, she's 22. And so we started a journey back in 2003. And during that time, it was really not a lot of information available. So we kind of had to kind of piecemeal things together to figure out what to do. And so we were basically placed in a community that we've had to navigate over the years in services and, education for her, and just trying to make it work as a family, because it really changed the journey that, we had planned for ourselves. And I always say, man plans and God laughs. And so he really laughed at us because we thought we had this great plan of what we were going to do as parents. And so we started on that journey with our daughter Kendall, and it's been an interesting journey. I must say, it's been a very interesting journey.
Well, for many of our listeners out there, they may have heard the phrase autism, but have no real clue or understanding as to what exactly autism is. Could you give us a definition of that of that matter?
I sure can. And I jumped over when I said we started this world, and I'll give you a backstory because it helps explain what autism is. So when my daughter was about 14 months, the sitter thought that Kendall had a hearing problem. And so that started our journey with a hearing assessment, occupational therapist, and a lot of other evaluations. And that is part of one of the symptoms of autism. She actually could hear us, but part of how things develop for those on the spectrum, it involves the way they receive and perceive communication. So she's able to hear just fine. However, it's a developmental disorder, and so it affects the way the person communicates, how they take in that communication, along with how they interact socially with others. And you can also have some behavioral challenges that could come about from a diagnosis. And with the diagnosis, you have 3 levels. So you have a level 1, level 2, and level 3. Your level 1 individuals, they typically do not have many cognitive issues. They struggle socially, and that's a big difference. Your middle, that level 2, you're going to have some cognitive issues. They're going to need support. And level 3, you're going to have extreme or severe cognitive issues, and they're going to need a lot of support. So our daughter Kendall falls within level 2. She has verbal skills, but she does have an intellectual disability as well that makes us have to continue to be her lifelong caregivers.
Okay. Well, and we often hear people who refer to the spectrum, and they'll say something about the spectrum or on the autistic spectrum. Would you elaborate on that and tell us a little more about what is the spectrum? And maybe part of what you just shared might have actually touched on that.
And that's exactly it. And the reason everybody calls it a spectrum is because you have those 3 levels, and a lot of people tend to assume that what's considered to be a level 1, which a lot of people think about as a genius. And I hate to use that word, but that's really what people want to think when they hear autism. They only want to think about the number 1s, which is the, intellectually they're there, socially is where the struggle is, or they want to hear about the extreme, the individual that may not have verbal skills and needs a lot of support. So that spectrum that people talk about goes from one end of intelligence all the way down to the lower end of intelligence. And along with that can come different adjustments socially and adjustments with behavior. So it's all about how they take in and experience the world. But that spectrum comes with the level 1, level 2, and level 3. So most people don't get into the levels when they talk about their loved one on the spectrum. It's more about in the educational setting when it comes up with the level 1, level 2, and level 3. But a big part is just getting people to understand it is a spectrum. So you never know, what that person's intellectual capabilities are. And I always tell people as it relates to our daughter, her expressive language is not the same as how she takes in everything. But when she tries to give it back to you verbally, it's going to jumble up. So we have to take that in consideration, and we tell others to take that in consideration when interacting with her. I think I answered the question, but I'm not
You did.
sure. Okay.
Well, I'm trying to make sure that our listeners fully grasp the concept and the diagnosis, no less. And I believe that what came to mind for me is that there is a television show that's been on for several years. They talk about The Good Doctor. And I believe one of his diagnoses is that he's on the autism spectrum. And I'm assuming he would fit in that what's called category 1.
Yes, he would. Very good. Yes, he would fit in level 1. And, because of TV shows like The Good Doctor, which I'm so happy we're starting to have shows with more characters that are on the spectrum, everyone wants to think that everybody falls either into level 1 like The Good Doctor or the Rain Man from the other movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, and really it's everything in between as well. So it's not just one or the other. It really is a spectrum of levels and abilities that we have to take into consideration when we think about someone that's on the spectrum. There's no one answer to it. There's no one solution. It's just a category of solutions, a category of characteristics that can be exhibited by those individuals on the spectrum.
Now, you mentioned that your daughter's diagnosis took place at around 14 months. I guess when the caregiver started noticing and thought that she was having an issue with sound and hearing. And you said that ultimately led to the diagnosis. Do we find that in today's times that more people are being diagnosed at such a young age, and otherwise, or is it that it takes generally much longer for those particular, what we call it, indicia to show up?
Mm-hmm. We were very fortunate when it came to our daughter because typically two things were not in our favor. She was less than 3 and she is a girl. And so what happens typically is right now, where we are in 2024, it is definitely something a lot of parents are aware of, and they're now comfortable giving someone as young as 10 months, 12 months, an autism diagnosis because we know so much more about it. We're able to now see and identify it. So for us to receive a diagnosis for our daughter back in, we started this journey in 2003 and receive that diagnosis was really unusual. And people were very shocked when we moved to the school system that she had a diagnosis at that young age. But now that shock is not there anymore because we know so much more about autism. So we are, able to identify those characteristics, and then it does not make that person have to wait until at one point the magic age was 3. Now that's not the case anymore. They're willing to, do an assessment and actually provide a diagnosis at a much younger age.
Wow. Now, it's obvious that your background and the issues relating to your daughter began to shape your personal journey as a parent dealing with the issue of autism and allowed you to become a training consultant and advocate and the like. And what would you say to those parents who are maybe even in a state of unknowing, maybe in a state of, well, they've got an initial diagnosis. What kind of guidance would you give to them so that it can, based upon your journey?
One of the things I always say is I need them to exhale and understand that life is going to be okay. It's unfortunate that it's so much negative information when someone Googles that a lot of people feel like their life is over if their child receives an autism diagnosis, and that's not true. So the first thing I want them to do is to take a deep breath and understand that, yes, it's a journey, and it's a journey they didn't plan for. However, they're going to be okay. And so that's my first thing. Just take a deep breath. If you're in your feelings, go ahead and deal with those emotions. But then where I need you to go from there is, depending on the age, to see if your state has services. So most states have services for individuals under the age of 3. So that's your starting point. If they're above the age of 3, contact your school system and let them know you have a concern for developmental delays. You're not calling them for an autism diagnosis. You're calling that school system about developmental delays. Then I need that family to get as much education as they can about autism. You want to become the advocate for your child, and the best way is to do some research so that you can make sure you understand autism, that you understand the things that work well for your child and the things that do not work well for your child. So that's another thing. And then I need you to be very, really intentional about building yourself a support network, because you're going to need that support. This is not a journey you want to take by yourself. You're going to need support, and that support does not have to be family, because my husband and I, we live out of state, away from our family. I'm here in the Atlanta area, and our family is in Jacksonville, but we had to build a network of support here with our daughter because we needed it. So deal with your emotions, look into your state and see what services they offer, educate yourself, and make sure you start to build that support network. That's going to be important.
So you made a transition, as you stated at the outset, that you were a biology major while in college. But yes, you made a transition, and now you are you fully immersed in the field of autism and autism advocacy?
Yes, I am. My first couple of years in education, I taught biology for 9 years. And when I relocated to the Atlanta area, my second degree from Clark Atlanta was in school counseling. So I spent the majority of my 27 years as a school counselor. And during that time, of course, was when our daughter was diagnosed. And so as we were moving through the school system with her, and I, of course, was working in the same school system as a school counselor, I then realized that, because this is early on in the early 2000s, and the numbers weren't as high as they are now. The numbers at that point were 1 in 250. So we were really having to educate as we were matriculating through the school system. And as we were educating, I realized that I could use what I was learning to help others. So I really started presenting at conferences while I was still working as a school counselor. And over the years, I continued doing that and being an advocate for my daughter and really all of the other students and families that I came in contact with. I could give them any information, where they should go. That was what I was focused on. And up until really I retired early to embrace this journey completely. So I retired early on 6/1/2023 and moved on with a consulting business that now allows me to provide training across the board to everyone. And I've been fortunate and able to go into some school systems and provide that training. So I'm now fully into it as a full-time autism consultant and autism advocate.
And I'm going to do this as a plug right now. So those in the listening audience, get your pen and paper in hand, because as we get to the conclusion of our interview, I'm going to reach out, ask her to give us her contact information. Are you open to talking with those in our listening audience, either who may be going through a similar journey as what you described, or even those who might know somebody who's going through such a journey? Would you be open for them being able to reach out and contact you?
Yes, I'm open for them to contact me. Sometimes that's the one thing that we forget when parents start a new journey, such as an autism journey. Having a conversation with someone who has experienced the journey allows them to realize it's going to be okay. So that's not a problem. So yes, we can definitely give out that information when we start to wrap things up at the end. It's not a problem.
You know, you mentioned earlier that when your daughter was first diagnosed, basically almost 20 years ago now, that there was, the numbers were like 1 in 250, I believe is what you said. But you said today the numbers have increased. Do you have an idea what the numbers are statistically that of young people or folks who are being diagnosed with autism?
It's 1 in 36 right now.
Wow, that's a significant jump in a 20-year period. Wow. Yes. And do we have any data that helps us to understand why this increase is so prevalent?
Part of it, many will say is because we now know more. And so because we know more, we are actually identifying more children on the spectrum. Knowing more has increased the number of diagnoses that's happening across the country. Then there are a lot of environmental factors that, many believe are playing a part in this increase we're seeing. So it's no one thing that's happening, but I will say part of that increase is because doctors are now, once they see the symptoms, they do an assessment, they're actually giving a diagnosis of autism a lot more than they have in previous years. So that's a big part of that increase.
Wow. And you mentioned earlier, too, when there's a big difference between when you have a child that's pre-school versus one who is has already begun the journey of education. Of course, in those settings, each school system has to provide an individual education plan. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is definitely correct. If the parent has, made contact with the school and has provided the documentation, then yes, that family or that child should have that individualized education plan. And with that plan, they're going to meet every year. They can meet more than once a year, but they're going to meet for sure once a year to look at the progress that child or that student is making. And so with that plan, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for those in our listening audience, if for some reason that your child is already in school and you feel like something's not quite right, you certainly have the not only the right to be able to get the child some diagnosed, get some help, but also to help. It's a federal right as far as the individual education plans are concerned. Each child has been it should be able to learn. I mean, kids learn differently, but certainly here's an example that, I mean, your daughter is, like you said earlier, 22, and I'm assuming she's still learning and still growing.
She's still learning and still growing. She's officially aged out of school, so we're on the opposite end of, this journey, and it's the part of the journey where I say autism grows up and becomes an adult. And so that creates a whole new set of challenges is really what I would say, because we're seeing things a little differently now. You're dealing with several agencies to get services. which is a big difference from when you're in the school system and everything is just there together.
Wow.
So it's really different being on the opposite side when you're dealing with so many different agencies to meet your needs.
And, of course, depending upon your location, I assume that the available resources could very well be different.
Most definitely. And, unfortunately, that's something that is such a bigger problem that we've got to make sure we're addressing. A big part of it has to come down to the pay. It's really hard to get workers when the pay is so low for a lot of the different programs that exist. So that's one of the problems. And then we've got to do better about making sure we're, encouraging students to look at working in fields like autism, looking in those areas that we're not really talking about, and that's going to help the situation as well.
Oh, okay. If an individual was thinking about pursuing this particular field and had a passion for helping persons who've been diagnosed with autism or any of the other similar, what we might call developmental disabilities, or what would be there? So let's talk to the college students for just a moment. What kind of majors should they consider pursuing?
Really, they can pursue all types of majors, and this is why we need them across all settings, and that's where we are also not looking at the big picture. So when you're thinking about someone that's interested in nursing, that's great. We need you to go that direction, but we want you to then look at areas where you can take those specialized courses that are just about autism. So continue with what you're doing with the nursing. Continue with the education, continue with the engineering. All of those things we want you to continue, but what you're going to need to do is get some additional specialized training in autism, because unfortunately right now it's not something that is just happening across the country on our college campuses. We still need those PE teachers. We still want you to do those things, but unfortunately it's going to require some additional coursework for them to get that specialized instruction that is targeted towards autism.
Well, as we think about that, your training, your education was both in, you mentioned earlier, you're proud Radler graduate. You mentioned also Clark, Atlanta, and I think looking at your bio, you also had some additional studies at Valdosta State. But 2 out of the 3 of those institutions are HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. And it raises a question with me that are there common misconceptions about autism that you have encountered, particularly within the black community?
Yes. A lot of things, what I've noticed, has to do with denial is a big one. That we really don't want to see that our loved one has a developmental disability, which could possibly be autism. So we would rather not know instead of seeking the help. Another thing is it plays into, are you parenting correctly? That the parents are doing something wrong. And so when people think about it as a parenting issue, they don't see it as an academic issue. So why explore it on a deeper level when that parent really just needs to get some parenting courses? And those 2 things are major because we're not fully embracing and accepting that autism is a part of the community we live in right now. And so those 2 things play a major part. That denial stops a lot of loved ones that are on the spectrum from receiving services because people think if I ignore it, it's going to go away. And unfortunately, it does not. It begins to become a small issue that then turns into a big issue because we did not address it properly. We did not get the correct interventions. We're not using the correct strategies. And so what could have been, something we worked on early on, it's much later on. And we all know once you form habits, it's much harder to break those habits. And that's a problem that happens for us a lot. The denial and the bad parenting. You have to be a bad parent. That's why your child is doing that. They wouldn't do that if they were with me. And so they don't want to see that it's really, about a child being diagnosed with autism, and how they receive information has nothing to do with the parent, and it's not going to go away if you ignore it.
Is there a role for the black church in the black community in terms of seeking to overcome some of these misconceptions, overcome some of these kind of issues that you're just mentioning?
Yes, a bit. You come into that accommodation part of things. And in schools, of course, we get those accommodations. But going out in the community, those accommodations are not there. And it becomes a challenge in places like church settings when your members, your usher boards, those that are greeting your guests have no background or understanding about autism. And so we've got to make sure we're not just having panel discussions, that we're thinking about the autism community, and that we are actually doing training for our workers in churches as well, so that they understand that you may have to have your nursery, you may have to have a special needs nursery that is separate from your regular nursery. But you can't just separate the children without having an adult that understands that difference. We've got to make sure that it's ongoing. And when we think about different events that we host, there's this real idea when it comes to individuals on the spectrum, there's a lot of sensory issues where lighting the wrong way could upset that child that's on the spectrum, the way something feels. And so churches need to look into sensory-friendly events, that they're actually taking into consideration their population that may have sensory needs and are part of the autism community. And that's going to make a big difference. We have some movie theaters now who are, they'll do events that are sensory-friendly, and that basically means they're not going to have the sound up as loud. They're not going to have the flickering lights. They really pay attention to things that could possibly be a trigger for someone that's on the spectrum. So we've got to make sure that we are actually doing those same things in our churches. And a big part of it is that inclusion is having more than just a panel discussion because it's April. It has to be training. Panel discussions are great. The time we're doing right now is great, but we still have to remember we need someone to come in and provide some training so that we have an understanding about autism, because that's really what it comes down to. One of my favorite quotes is, understanding requires not just a moment of perception, but a continuous awareness, a continuous state of inquiry without conclusion. So we've got to realize it's ongoing. It's not just a one-time thing. And that's going to make a huge difference.
I have to confess that one of the things that caused me to learn a lot about autism was an incident that took place in my courtroom years ago when I was still on the bench. And I had an instance where a young man was probably about 16, maybe 17 at the most, maybe 16. He was tall, and he was under foster care. And during the course of the hearing standing in front of me, all of a sudden he started hitting on his caregiver. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, my God, what is this? What is going on? And it was only because my deputy had come in from the back room, and he had, of course, had a green uniform. I'm the one that freaked out from the bench. The caregiver did not, and she merely just calmly just sort of grabbed his hands and then kind of gave him a big hug and pulled him close to her. And I later learned that the reason why he had a trigger, it was because every time he had seen these guys in the green deputy uniform in law enforcement, they were coming to remove him and transfer him from one space, one caregiver under the care of DCF to another. And so that was a trigger for him, looking and seeing that green sheriff's deputy coming in with the deputy with the gun on his side, and you know, and that entire thing was a trigger for him. But thank God that the woman that was the caregiver understood that, and she literally she calmed him down, and she explained to me later what was going on, because, you know, it kind of felt like a little bit of an imbecile because I didn't pick up on that. But it was a lesson learned, and it shows you that we are constantly and continually learning. And based upon that, it gave me a greater sensitivity to the whole notion of autism. But then even as we're talking tonight, you know, we recognize further that there is no, you know, no cookie cutter autism. There is, you know, there's such a range of different acts and actions of triggers, no less, that might cause a young person to have an outburst of some type.
They have a meltdown. Correct. They have a meltdown because of that trigger. And that's a big part. That caregiver, I give her, you know, she gets a gold medal because she was so aware of that young man's triggers. She knew immediately why he was upset. And because she was a trusted adult, she knew how to de-escalate him. Now, of course, in that situation, if she didn't have an awareness of, you know, his triggers, she could have reacted in the wrong way, which would have caused him to act out even more. Because I always remind people, an escalated adult cannot de-escalate an escalated child. If you're upset, you've got to step back. But because she understood, she, you know, was aware of his triggers, she understands autism, she knew exactly what to do to reground him and to calm him and let him know he was going to be okay. But that plays into the part where I said, if you have a child that's on the spectrum, you've got to make sure you are educating yourself so that you are that child's strongest advocate. You know the things that are going to be triggers for them. And in some instances, you can avoid them. But when you can't, you know that loved one enough, you know how to help them de-escalate and calm down instead of having that sensory overload moment and having a meltdown.
Yeah, that's so important because I was the one that was, I would say I was out of it. I was thinking, wait a minute, is this kid out of control here?
Correct.
And I was getting ready to try to lock him up, but not realizing that this kid was having a meltdown. And later we put two and two together to figure it out because of her help and her literally guiding me to know that it wasn't that he was doing something that was delinquent. That was his reaction because he didn't want to be taken away. And that was a trigger. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And that it's it was a form of communication. He may not verbally have been able to, maybe he could, but his body's reaction was in response to that trigger. And like you said, it was a good thing she was able to know that trigger for him and know what it would take to actually get him to calm down and to realize he was going to be okay. But that's a big part of where we've got to make sure we're doing more to educate across the board. We can't have situations, happen like that because they can turn into the wrong situation. We can have a different outcome. And it all comes down to that training, that understanding will make a huge difference in how others respond. It actually breaks my heart because a lot of families are afraid to go out with their loved ones that are on the spectrum because they are afraid of having such a moment like that. And in having that moment, how the other people are going to respond. And in that response, are they going to call in the police thinking it's more than what it is? So the more we educate, then you'll be, you kind of get to the point to where you can see, you can tell this is not a child that's acting out. This is a child that's dealing with a sensory overload moment. This is a child that's had something that has triggered them, and that caregiver, that parent, is trying to de-escalate them. And so in understanding autism, you then have an awareness that if too many people become involved, it's not going to help the situation. It's going to escalate the situation. So the best thing to do is, if that person says they need some help, fine. But if not, allow them to deal with that individual. They know what they're doing. They understand them. And what may seem like a really bad situation from others, the more we know about autism, we will not then judge that situation. We will know what it is, and we will then be there as a support when things have settled down, to let that parent, that caregiver know it's going to be okay. And that's what we've got to do more of. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be a little intrusive here and ask you to kind of describe for us a sort of like a personal day, a day in your life in terms of how you address these issues with your daughter.
So, our daughter deals with aggression. And that's not all children that are on the spectrum, but that is something she deals with as a form of communication when things change out of the routine. And so one of the big things that helps us and her is structure and routine. So we have a very structured and routine nighttime schedule that we follow, and we've been doing this for years. So even when we're out of town, we adhere to her schedule so that she can have a sense of peace. So I can give you an example of how things have gone off track. And I share this. I actually wrote a book 2 years ago about our story, and it's because I wanted people to know their highs and lows that happen on this journey. So one of the stories where, just to give you an idea of someone on the spectrum, and something that if you don't know and understand autism, you would take it the wrong way. We changed what was typically the dinner on a Saturday night for my daughter. Now, yes, you can change things, but it requires having a conversation before and preparing her for that change. We didn't do that. And so when she realized the meal had changed, she became very upset. And she took off and she was throwing things. And in the process of me trying to get to her to help her calm down, she was tossing things just out of frustration. Well, she tossed the remote and it hit me in the face.
Ooh.
And it required me above my eye to have 5 stitches. Well, I didn't hold that as in, oh my goodness, I knew she was not trying to hurt me. She was dealing with her own moment of trying to resettle her system because we had changed the routine. And a part of autism is predictability. When that person can predict what's going to happen next, it allows them to reduce their levels of anxiety. So something as simple as us changing that meal without having a conversation with her, it totally threw her off. And she, of course, was upset once she noticed what had happened, but I knew she was not trying to hurt me. She was really just dealing with the moment of the situation. So that's an extreme of things, but that's a moment where if someone else would have seen that situation, they would have thought she was just this bad child. But that wasn't the case. And so even when I went to the urgent care for the stitches, and I told, the doctor what happened, because he had an understanding of autism, he, was like, I can see how this happened, and moved on with the situation. Now, someone that does not have an understanding, and you go to an urgent care, and let's just say right now she's 22, that person may think you're being abused as an adult and may want to call the police because they don't have an understanding of autism. So that's why it's so important that we have an understanding. So for us, that's not a typical day, but But that is one of the extreme moments I try to explain to people how something so small can change how she handles a situation. So we make sure we have a lot of structure to our day. The nighttime routine, and actually I threw her off tonight because I didn't want her running around getting ready to take a bath, because 9 o'clock is her bath time, even at 22. So we gave her a little reprieve and told her she could stay up to 10 and take a bath at 10 o'clock, and then she could go to bed at 11. And this is us having that conversation because we know how she handles change. And she was okay with it. Now, just trying to abruptly do that without having a conversation could have caused her to have a moment where that threw her off. She's now upset, and she needs to resettle herself. But in that process, she could become upset and decide she wants to throw something or kick something in settling down. But it's not about her wanting to hurt someone. It's really about her trying to recenter herself from a situation that's out of control for her. And she does not fully handle that control. You know, she doesn't have the ability to control things the way most of us do. Mm-hmm.
You know, as I'm looking at your bio, and I'm reminded of the fact that you are an author, and
yes.
your book seems to be focused upon how you guys dealt with and are still dealing with Kendall. So
yes.
talk about what's the title of your book and where is it available?
The title of our book is A Crusade for Kendall, A Black Family's Journey with Autism. And Crusade is with a K. It's available on Amazon. And a big part of us telling our story came about from when I said I would go out and do presentation at conferences. And people would hear me talk about the highs and lows. And they would say, you need to write a book. Well, we all know when we write a book about ourselves, we open ourselves up to judgment. And so that was something we were worried about, because it did include some moments that are not the best moments, you know, and we know we're not bad parents, but because people want to assume, you know, so we wrote the story, and it's about our journey from diagnosis with Kendall until age 18. Because a big part of what, you know, people forget, we have a son, and they're 14 months apart. So we had to learn early on that they had two different sets of needs, and that it was not always going to be the easiest thing to do to meet both of their needs. And so one of the things I share in the story, in the book, is when they were both at daycare, and the daycare coordinator asked us if Kendall could leave at the end of the week and let that be her last day, but they wanted to keep our son there. Right. And that was so early in our journey, and we had to make a decision and understand his needs were being met at that daycare and her needs were not being met. And so we did leave him there. And he thrived, and we had to, you know, we went on a roller coaster of finding a daycare that worked for her, but we understood we couldn't move him when he was doing well just because it was not working for her. So those are things we talk about, and just how, you know, we travel. You know, we still love each other. We still have joy. So it's a story of resilience and hope, and to let people know there's life after an autism diagnosis. Your life does not stop. It's all about, you know, doing things, that everybody's journey is different. But one of the things for us, we were isolated, and we felt very isolated on our journey, and especially in the Black community. People just weren't talking about autism. And, you know, now I'm happy that so many people are having conversations, because the more we have conversations, the more inclusive we become as a society. So the title of the book, again, is A Crusade for Kendall, and Crusade is with a K. It's available on Amazon. After I wrote that book, because I'm so much of an educator, I realized I told our story, and I talked about how we dealt with certain things, but I really did not provide the tools for someone else to do some of the things we did, to learn about autism, because we read so many books and, it's so many articles we had to read trying to gather all this information. So I took everything I learned and put it into one book so that parents and educators could go to one resource and get page after page of a strategy or an intervention without having to read chapter books. So those two are, currently available. The workbook is only available on our website, and I'll give that address, or we give out the email address at the end. And the Crusade for Kendall is available on Amazon. So it was one of those things of writing the story and realizing if I really want to be the advocate that I am, I have to provide a resource that others can use to grow their understanding of autism.
Wow. Well, and you have certainly, by capturing the story that you have shared through your written book, the written materials, and of course your speaking engagements, it certainly does help to spread the word and open the eyes of many in terms of how they deal with kids. So these kids don't become throwaways, or
Correct.
People don't look at them as if they're, from another planet or something.
Yes.
Are there some
Yes.
other insights or interventions that you have used? Any other resources in addition to? Because now I'm promoting your books, but I'd like to know, were there other? Those of you out there that are even thinking about the issue, somebody. Hey, look, add these to your library, and don't let them get dusty. Use the information that can be helpful. What I'm wondering is, are there any organizations that are focused upon addressing issues within the Black community?
There's one that immediately comes to mind, and it is Autism in Black. And so they actually have a mini conference, a conference coming up in the next 2 weeks, maybe. It's virtual, but it's definitely something for parents, caregivers, and educators to look into. Another place that I see as a great resource of information, and it goes back to our journey, is Autism Speaks. When we first started our journey, there were several organizations that were, giving you pieces of information. However, in 2005, Autism Speaks, I can remember they were on Good Morning America, and it was because of their grandson. So the founders had a grandson that was diagnosed with autism, and really that's when it hit the big stage. And it became more of a topic that people were talking about. However, it still is not where we should be at this point. So those are two places for sure I would send people, along with our website. And I encourage people to follow me on Facebook, because I use my platform to share information. I go live once a week for sure and have a conversation and talk about different information related to autism, because I want to make sure that there is free information that's out there, as well as there are paid services to gain more knowledge. So I'm putting some free, but I also provide those services of training sessions.
Wow.
One of the other things, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, that is a perfect segue to us giving out your contact information so that those who want to follow up and have you come in, do some training, or follow up and have some other consults, maybe helping to direct some persons who are having those issues in the right direction, beyond, that goes beyond our services tonight.
Yes.
Give us your contact information. And since this hour is really fast, and we're rapidly,
I know.
Rapidly coming to an end. So let's go ahead and do that now so that we won't miss out on that.
Yes. And so the best way to reach me, and make sure you write this down, because my first name is spelled in a very different way. So it's Tanyika. It's Tanyika. I'll say that part again. Tanyika at Kendall, KendallASC.org. So that is one way you can email me directly. I still check my email. So I'm the person reading my emails. I also encourage you to go to our website, which is www.Kendall, once again, KendallASC.org, and sign up for our newsletter. I send out information as well about autism and different tips. And, one of the things I've sent out, I think I sent it out today, was about siblings. We've got to make sure we're thinking about the siblings of those our families when we have someone that's on the spectrum. So those are two ways. And then my name on Facebook, it's Tanyika Mayhew Butler on Facebook. And on Instagram, you can find me at, I know I'm at several different places. The only place I am not is TikTok. I'm just not there. It's in due season. I guess I'll go there, but I'm not. But on Instagram, I'm at the Autism Support Coach.
Okay. All right. Well, certainly these things are important. And for those of you that, if for some reason that you weren't able to write fast enough to get all that information, if you'll come to our website, artistfirst.com, the Judge Hubert Radio Hour, you'll see a beautiful smiling face there, Ms. Butler's bio as well, including contact information. And, of course, this podcast, this radio show will be converted to a podcast in the next 24 to 48 hours, and you'll be able to direct others to come to the podcast, listen to it, gain some very valuable information that can certainly help the journey that we have with any kids, young people that have been diagnosed or maybe haven't even been diagnosed.
Correct.
Maybe this is the kind of encouragement that's needed for you to reach out and recognize that you're not alone, that there are people willing and able to help you with your child who may be experiencing such developmental delays as Ms. Butler has pointed out here tonight. And so as we get ready to wrap up for this evening, any final words that you'd like to leave with our audience?
I just will say to, anyone listening, if you see some concerns, I need you to say something. And I refer to it as, do you need to sit someone down and have a conversation? And that can be the hardest thing for you to do, but it's going to be the best thing you could ever do for someone if you see characteristics of autism and you realize they're not seeing them, rather they're really not seeing them, or they're in denial. We've got to do better and make sure we're supporting one another. And if we see something, say something.
Amen. All right. Well, certainly it's been a pleasure having an opportunity to engage you, and certainly doing so during this month of autism recognition. And of course, I'm glad to see that we are as a country continuing to move forward with seeking to try to solve problems and to be able to solve issues. And of course, we know that no one in this country is perfect by any means, but this is an opportunity to be able to address issues to help strengthen our young people in particular and help them to be able to have a good quality of life and to be able to accomplish some of their dreams. So again, thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, we look forward to our future encounters as we journey together here in this community. So again, I say to all of you out there in the listening audience, you have been listening to my interview tonight with Ms. Tanyika Mayhew Butler. She is the CEO and lead consultant of Kendall Autism Support and Counseling and Consulting. And of course, if you need to get in contact with her, have her come speak to your churches, speak to your organizations, or speak to you. The information she shared, the contact is out there, so make sure that you follow up. And so as we get ready to come to an end tonight, we always say as we conclude, we hope that you have learned something during the course of our dialogue tonight. We're always remembering that education is the key to being and staying free. Don't let anybody take your education away from you. It's valuable. It's more valuable than gold, more valuable than diamonds. Learning is something that helps to change the world, but more importantly, it helps to change each one of us first and foremost. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and sign off for tonight. Look forward to being back with you again on the next edition of the Judge Hubert Radio Hour. Good night, and God bless you all.
Good night.